You know exactly what you need to do, the conversation you need to have, the change you need to make, the risk you need to take. You've known for months, maybe years, but every time you get close to doing it, your brain generates a reason why now isn't the right time. And that reason sounds so logical, so reasonable, so obviously true that you believe it completely and put it off again. Here's what you're not seeing. That logical reason isn't the real reason. Your excuses aren't explanations for why you're not doing the thing. They're protection mechanisms preventing you from facing what you're actually afraid of. And the most dangerous part is that your excuses feel like truth, which is exactly why they work so well at keeping you stuck. We've been taught that excuses are just weak explanations, that people who make excuses are simply unmotivated or lazy or not committed enough, that if you really wanted something, you'd find a way instead of finding an excuse. And there's truth in that surface-level assessment, but it completely misses what's actually happening in your psychology when you generate an excuse. Your excuses aren't random. They're not just convenient lies you tell yourself to avoid effort. Your brain is generating them systematically to protect you from something it perceives as threatening. And until you understand what your excuses are actually protecting you from, you'll keep believing them, keep using them, and keep wondering why you can't seem to make the changes you consciously want to make. Think about the last major excuse you used. Maybe it was, "I don't have time." Maybe it was, "I don't have the money." Maybe it was, "I need to learn more first." Or, "The timing isn't right." Or, "I'm waiting for the right opportunity." And in the moment you said it, it felt completely true. You genuinely believed you were being realistic and rational. But here's the test that reveals the lie. If circumstances changed and you suddenly had time or money or knowledge or perfect timing, would you actually do the thing? Or would your brain immediately generate a new excuse? Because that's what happens when you address the surface excuse without dealing with what it's protecting. Your brain just creates a new one. This is the excuse regeneration pattern. Your conscious mind treats excuses as obstacles to overcome. If you just had more time, you'd do it. But your unconscious mind is using excuses as shields against threat. And if you remove one shield, it will immediately create another one because the threat is still there. The excuse is a symptom. The threat is the actual problem. Jake wanted to start his own business for 5 years. Every year, he had a different excuse. First year, "I don't have enough money saved." So he saved more money. Second year, "I don't have the right skills yet." So he took courses and learned. Third year, "The market isn't right." Fourth year, "I need a partner first." Fifth year, "My current job is too demanding right now." Each excuse felt valid when he was using it. But when he finally got honest with himself, he realized none of those were the real reason. The real reason was terror of failure, fear of judgment, and deep uncertainty about whether he was actually capable of succeeding. Every excuse was his mind's way of protecting him from facing that fear by giving him a logical reason to avoid it. The excuses weren't about money or skills or timing. They were about fear wearing a rational mask. Because that's what excuses do. They take emotional fears and translate them into logical-sounding reasons. Your brain doesn't want to admit you're afraid,
because admitting fear feels vulnerable and weak. So instead, it generates an excuse that sounds reasonable and external, something about circumstances or resources or timing that lets you avoid the thing without having to confront the fear driving the avoidance.
This is the rationalization shield. Your emotional brain makes a decision based on fear or discomfort, and then your rational brain creates a logical-sounding explanation for why that decision makes sense. You're not lazy. You're being strategic about timing. You're not scared. You're being realistic about resources. You're not avoiding. You're waiting for the right opportunity. The excuse reframes fear as wisdom. And this is why excuses are so dangerous. They don't feel like avoidance. They feel like intelligent decision-making. You genuinely believe you're being smart and rational by waiting until you have more money, more time, more knowledge, better circumstances. Your brain has convinced you that the excuse is the reason, when actually the excuse is the cover story for a reason you're not consciously acknowledging. Think about someone you know who's been waiting for the right time to make a change for years. The right time never comes, does it? Because the right time isn't what they're actually waiting for. They're waiting for the fear to go away, for the risk to disappear, for certainty to arrive. And since those things will never happen, the excuse just keeps getting recycled in different forms, while years pass and nothing changes. Maria spent 3 years saying she couldn't leave her unfulfilling relationship because of logistics, shared apartment, intertwined finances, complicated timing. She'd list all the practical obstacles whenever anyone asked why she was still in a relationship that clearly wasn't working. And those obstacles were real, but they weren't why she was staying. She was staying because leaving meant facing uncertainty, being alone, admitting the relationship was a mistake, dealing with judgment from family who loved her partner, and confronting her fear that maybe she couldn't do better. But saying, "I'm scared and uncertain," felt weak. Saying, "The logistics are complicated right now," felt reasonable. The excuse let her avoid the relationship without having to confront why she was avoiding it. This is the function of excuses in relationships specifically. They let you stay in situations that aren't working without having to confront why you're accepting them. You don't stay because you don't have other options. You stay because leaving activates fears you're not ready to face. You don't stay because they might change. You stay because the known dysfunction feels safer than the unknown possibility. The excuse provides cover for the fear. But here's where it gets even darker. Your excuses aren't just protecting you from fear. They're also protecting you from responsibility. Because if the reason you're not doing something is external, circumstances, resources, other people, timing, then it's not your fault. You're not failing, you're just waiting for conditions to improve. The excuse absolves you of agency. This is the responsibility dodge. As long as you can point to an external excuse for why you're not doing the thing, you don't have to face the uncomfortable truth that you're choosing not to do it. You're not choosing to stay in the unfulfilling job. You can't afford to leave right now. You're not choosing to avoid the difficult conversation. You're waiting for the right moment. You're not choosing stagnation. You're being prevented by circumstances. But the moment you recognize the excuse as an excuse, you have to face something much more uncomfortable. You're choosing this. Maybe for good reasons. Maybe because the fear is legitimate. Maybe because you're not ready. But you're choosing it. And that recognition, that ownership, that acceptance of agency feels threatening because it means you can't blame circumstances anymore. You have to face your own role in your stuckness. David had been saying for 2 years that he'd start working out once work calms down. Work never calmed down. There was always a busy season, always a project, always something demanding his time and energy. And the excuse felt valid. He genuinely was busy, genuinely was tired. But when he got honest, he realized dozens of other people with schedules just as demanding were working out consistently.
The difference wasn't their schedules. The difference was that they decided it was important enough to make it happen regardless of circumstances, while he decided it wasn't, but didn't want to admit that to himself, saying work is too busy. Let him avoid the gym without having to face that he was choosing not to prioritize it. The excuse protected him from responsibility for his own choice. So how do you identify when you're using an excuse versus when you have a legitimate reason? Because sometimes the obstacle is real. Sometimes you genuinely don't have the resources, or the time, or the right circumstances. How do you distinguish between an excuse that's protecting you from fear and a reason that's guiding intelligent decision-making? Here's the test. If someone offered you $10 million to do the thing tomorrow, could you figure out how to do it? Not asking if it would be easy, or comfortable, or ideal. Asking if you could figure out a way to do it. Because if the answer is yes, then the excuse isn't about actual impossibility. It's about priorities, fear, or unwillingness that you're not being honest about. You don't have time to work out. But if someone paid you $10 million to work out tomorrow, you'd find time. You can't have the difficult conversation because the timing isn't right. But if the relationship you wanted depended on having it, you'd have it. You can't start the business because you don't have enough saved. But if the opportunity was closing tomorrow, you'd find a way. The excuse evaporates when the motivation becomes strong enough, which means it was never about the excuse. This doesn't mean all obstacles are excuses. Sometimes you genuinely cannot do something because of real constraints. But the question is, are you treating the constraint as something to work around, or are you treating it as a reason to give up? Because the person who wants it badly enough finds ways around constraints. The person who's afraid but won't admit it finds reasons why constraints make the thing impossible. This is the constraint versus excuse distinction. A constraint is something you acknowledge and work within or around. An excuse is something you use to justify not trying. Same objective obstacle, completely different relationship to it. And you can tell which one you're doing by whether you're brainstorming solutions or collecting reasons why solutions won't work. Rachel wanted to switch careers, but said she couldn't because she'd have to take a pay cut and couldn't afford it. Valid concern, real constraint. But was it a constraint she was trying to work around, or an excuse she was using to avoid the fear of career change? The way to tell, was she budgeting to see if she could make a lower salary work, or was she just stating the pay cut as a reason why the change was impossible? She was doing the latter, not because she was lying or weak, but because the pay cut excuse let her avoid confronting the deeper fears, that she might not be good at the new career, that she might regret the change, that she'd invested so many years in the current path that switching felt like admitting waste. The financial excuse was real, but it was also protecting her from having to face those scarier possibilities. And this is the trap of excuses. They're rarely complete lies. They usually contain truth. You genuinely are busy. You genuinely do have financial constraints. You genuinely could benefit from more knowledge or better timing. The excuse uses real factors to build a protective story, which makes it incredibly convincing to your conscious mind, even though your unconscious mind knows it's generating the excuse specifically to avoid something it finds threatening. So what are your excuses actually protecting you from?
Because once you identify the real fear underneath the excuse loses its power. You can't unsee the mechanism once you understand it, and understanding it means you have a choice. Either face the fear and do the thing anyway, or consciously acknowledge you're choosing not to because of the fear. Either way, you're no longer hiding behind the excuse.
Most excuses are protecting you from one of three core fears: fear of failure, fear of judgment, or fear of losing your current identity. You don't start the business because what if it fails and proves you're not capable? You don't have the difficult conversation because what if people think badly of you? You don't make the change because what if you're no longer the person you've been identifying as for years? These fears feel massive because they threaten your sense of self. Failure threatens your belief that you're competent. Judgment threatens your sense of social safety. Identity change doesn't destroy you. It's literally how growth happens. The excuses are protecting you from dangers that feel real but aren't actually dangerous in the way your brain thinks they are. When Jake finally started his business, after 5 years of excuses, none of the catastrophes his brain had been protecting him from actually happened. Some things went wrong. Some people judged. His identity shifted, but he didn't die. His sense of self survived. He was capable of handling the discomfort his brain had been treating as unbearable. The excuses had been protecting him from a threat level that was massively exaggerated. This is the threat exaggeration that drives excuse-making. Your brain evolved to overestimate threats because in ancestral environments, overestimating danger kept you alive. Better to assume the rustling bush is a predator and be wrong than assume it's wind and be eaten. So your brain applies that same overestimation to psychological threats. Better to avoid the career change and stay safe than risk it and face imagined catastrophe. But in modern life, this overestimation keeps you trapped. The psychological risks you're avoiding aren't actually threats to your survival. They're threats to your comfort, your current identity, your ego. And while those feel important, they're not worth the cost of never doing anything that scares you, never making changes you need to make, spending your life believing excuses that keep you stuck in place. So the first step to breaking free from excuses is recognizing them as excuses. Not beating yourself up for having them, not pretending they're not real concerns, but seeing them clearly as protection mechanisms that your brain is generating because it's overestimating threat. The excuse is trying to help you. It's just helping you avoid growth by keeping you comfortable, instead of helping you face fear and expand. The second step is asking what the excuse is protecting you from. What would you have to face if you couldn't use this excuse anymore? What fear would you have to confront? What responsibility would you have to take? What identity would you have to let go of? Because that's where the real work is. The excuse is just a symptom of the deeper avoidance. When Maria finally left her relationship, it wasn't because the logistics suddenly got easier. It was because she got tired of lying to herself about why she was staying. She faced the fear of being alone, the uncertainty of what came next, the judgment she knew would come. And all of those things happened. It was uncomfortable, but it was survivable. And once she stopped using logistics as an excuse, she was free to make the choice she actually wanted to make. This is the power that comes from dropping excuses. You regain agency. As long as you're blaming circumstances, you're powerless. You can only act when circumstances change. But when you recognize excuses as protective mechanisms and face the fears underneath them, you realize circumstances don't control you nearly as much as you thought they did. You have way more choice than your excuses were letting you see. You have a lot more choice than your excuses were letting you see.
But facing this requires something most people avoid: brutal honesty with yourself about what you're actually afraid of and whether that fear is legitimate or exaggerated. Your brain will fight this honesty because the excuses are serving a protective function. Admitting, "I'm not doing this because I'm scared," feels vulnerable. Saying, "I'm not doing this because circumstances prevent it," feels safe. Yet the vulnerability is where freedom lives. When you can admit, "I'm using this excuse to avoid facing my fear of failure," you've already started breaking the pattern. When you can say, "I'm choosing not to do this because I'm not ready to face the discomfort, and I'm okay with that choice," you've taken your power back from the excuse. You're no longer trapped by it. You're consciously choosing based on honest assessment. And sometimes that honest assessment is, "The fear is legitimate and I'm genuinely not ready yet." That's fine, but it's completely different from hiding behind an excuse. When you're honest about fear, you can work with it, prepare for it, decide when you're ready to face it. When you're hiding behind an excuse, you're just stuck in perpetual not yet without any real plan for when yet will arrive. David eventually started working out not because work got less busy, but because he stopped lying to himself that work was the reason. He admitted he'd been prioritizing comfort over health, and once he was honest about that, he could make a different choice. Work didn't change. His relationship to the excuse changed, and that was what actually mattered. Your excuses are showing you exactly where your fears live. Every excuse is a signpost pointing to growth you're avoiding, identity you're protecting, comfort you're unwilling to surrender, which means your excuses are actually incredibly valuable information if you're willing to see them clearly instead of believing them blindly. Most people spend their lives collecting better excuses, more sophisticated reasons why they can't do the thing, more convincing explanations for why circumstances prevent them, more rational-sounding justifications for staying exactly where they are. And they genuinely believe they're being realistic, when actually they're just getting better at lying to themselves. But you can make a different choice. You can start seeing your excuses as what they actually are: protection mechanisms your brain generates to help you avoid discomfort. And once you see them clearly, you can decide, is this discomfort I'm avoiding actually threatening, or is my brain overestimating the danger? Is this excuse serving my growth, or is it keeping me trapped? Because the darkest truth about excuses is this: every year you spend believing them is a year you spend not becoming who you could be. Every opportunity you avoid because of an excuse is an opportunity lost. Every change you don't make because circumstances aren't perfect is a change that never happens. And time doesn't wait for your excuses to run out. The conversation you need to have won't get easier with time. The change you need to make won't become less scary. The risk you need to take won't stop being a risk. The only thing that changes is whether you're honest about why you're not doing it, whether you're using excuses to hide from fear or facing fear despite the discomfort it brings. Your excuses have been protecting you from the very experiences that would help you grow. They've been keeping you safe by keeping you small. And they've been convincing because that's their job, to sound so reasonable, so logical, so obviously true that you never question them. But now you know what they're actually hiding. The question is, are you ready to stop believing them and start facing what they've been protecting you from? Because your life is waiting on the other side of the excuses you've been using to avoid living it.